It was the 26th of April, 1944. The air at Camp Aliceville, Alabama, was thick with spring heat and pine dust. The train screeched to a halt, and the guards shouted for everyone to disembark. Down the steps came rows of weary men in dusty, sun-bleached uniforms, the cream of Rommel's Afrika Korps. Only months before, these soldiers had fought under the blazing desert sun of Tunisia, proud, disciplined, and certain of victory. Now they stood in a land they'd been told was chaotic, materialistic, and spiritually hollow America. For many, this was their first time setting foot on enemy soil. They expected rough treatment, suspicion, even hatred, yet what they found was not the America of their propaganda posters. Inside the camp fences, the guards offered cigarettes. Some smiled, others joked in broken German. One young soldier, still clutching his duffel, whispered, "They don't even look angry." Days passed, routines formed, work details, meals, inspections, all carried out with military precision. Life behind barbed wire settled into an uneasy calm. Then, one warm evening, as the sun bled out over the pines, a strange sound drifted across the camp. A low hum, then a sharp trumpet call, a steady rhythm. A saxophone joined in, smooth, defiant, alive. The Germans froze. This wasn't the regimented marches of the Wehrmacht, nor the sentimental waltzes of home. It was wild, improvised, unrestrained. It was jazz. That night, something changed inside those fences. For the first time, these prisoners began to feel the pulse of a world they'd never known, a world that sounded freer than any they'd imagined. They had once marched across North Africa with the confidence of conquerors. In the spring of 1943, the Afrika Korps, the pride of German Field Command, collapsed under relentless Allied assaults. When Tunis fell, tens of thousands were captured, most expected imprisonment in Britain or the Middle East. Instead, rumors spread. "They're sending us." Across the ocean aboard Liberty ships, the prisoners sailed for weeks, guarded but treated with unexpected professionalism. They slept in cramped holds, listening to the engines hum as the Atlantic swells rolled beneath them. Many whispered that America must be desperate for labor to bring prisoners so far. Others, more fearful, thought they were being taken to forced labor camps, but when they arrived, the reality disarmed them. In Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, and even the Midwest, the United States had built sprawling compounds to house German captives. Camp Aliceville alone stretched over 500 acres, a self-contained town of barracks, kitchens, hospitals, and recreation fields. The first impressions stunned them. Order, whitewashed fences, clean latrines, hot food 3 times a day. Some guards even saluted the prisoners, a courtesy almost unthinkable on the Eastern Front. One POW later recalled, "We were enemies, but they treated us like soldiers. That confused us more than any lecture could." Every camp had a rhythm. Wake up whistle at dawn, roll call under the flag, breakfast of powdered eggs and grits, work details in nearby farms or sawmills, evenings spent reading, writing, or staring at the distant tree line. And yet, beneath the routine, curiosity stirred. Who were these Americans who fought with such abundance? Even the guards seemed casual, confident, unafraid of rank. Cigarettes were plentiful. Coffee flowed freely. Still, isolation hung heavy. The war raged on oceans away. Letters from home were censored, late, or never arrived. Rumors whispered through the barracks about bombings, about lost cities, about the war turning against them. Then, one night, something unexpected broke that monotony. From the recreation hut beyond the inner fence, a few guards were gathered around a record player. A faint melody slipped into the humid air. It wasn't military. It wasn't solemn. It was alive. That moment would mark the beginning of a quiet revolution behind barbed wire. The next evening, it happened again. The same low pulse, a steady rhythm that made feet tap before the mind caught up. Trumpets blared, a clarinet danced between notes, and a bass beat kept time like a heartbeat. To the German prisoners, it was unlike anything they had heard back home. Some knew of jazz only from propaganda leaflets, the so-called degenerate music banned by Nazi authorities, condemned as chaotic, un-German, and dangerous. In the Reich, jazz was whispered about, but rarely heard. It had been branded as music of disorder, corrupting the youth. Yet here, inside an enemy prison camp, it was being played openly. The sound came from the American Guards' rec hall, a large wooden hut lit by yellow bulbs, its windows cracked open in the warm night. Inside, a handful of guards and local volunteers gathered around a borrowed phonograph. On the turntable spun records of Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, and Count Basie. The notes leapt and swirled through the air, carried on the wind toward the German compound. At first, the POWs listened from a distance, cautious, unsure if they were even allowed. But the music's energy was magnetic. Some gathered near the fence, pretending to smoke, eyes fixed on the glowing windows across the yard. It didn't take long for curiosity to overcome fear. A few guards noticed the watchers and grinned. One shouted, "Come on, fellas, it's just music," and turned the volume higher. The camp commander, a middle-aged officer named Colonel Clarence Boggs, was strict but pragmatic. He believed that good morale kept order, and so, rather than forbid it, he encouraged the formation of POW orchestras, German bands that could play their own music during holidays or Sunday evenings. Within weeks, requests went out for instruments. The Red Cross, local churches, and even nearby colleges sent what they could: trumpets, clarinets, drums, and battered pianos. The Germans organized quickly after all. Many had been musicians or students before the war. But as they practiced, something curious happened. Some of the American Guards joined in. The POWs played waltzes and marches. The Guards answered with swing. Before long, tunes began to mix a German melody in a jazz rhythm, a jazz standard, with a new harmony. It was spontaneous, unplanned, the kind of collaboration no propaganda officer could have scripted. One prisoner later wrote, "It was the first time I saw an American not as an enemy, but as a man playing music and laughing. From then on, the fences seemed a little less sharp, the watchtowers a little less high, and for the first time, the air of the camp felt lighter. But for many of these men, the sound of jazz carried more than rhythm. It carried meaning, a glimpse into a society that lived by entirely different rules. The German prisoners had come from a world where structure ruled everything, uniforms pressed sharp, salutes timed perfectly, music measured and approved by the Ministry of Propaganda. Now, they watched Americans' guards, civilians, even nurses move with a rhythm that ignored hierarchy. On Saturday nights, across the camp fence, the guards held small dances with local girls from the nearby town. A portable radio crackled, and couples swayed to Glenn Miller's "In the Mood." The laughter carried through the pine trees. To the prisoners, it was surreal. Here they were, locked behind wire, while the enemy danced freely just beyond reach. But that same laughter stirred something unexpected, a strange mix of envy and wonder. One corporal, formerly a teacher from Munich, wrote in his diary, "They live as if tomorrow is certain. We Germans live as if it must be earned." Everywhere they looked, the rules seemed looser. The guards addressed each other casually, sometimes even joking with their superiors. American soldiers shared stories, cursed freely, laughed loudly. To German eyes, that casual confidence felt alien, even dangerous, yet undeniably magnetic. Music became the bridge. Some of the prisoners, emboldened, asked to learn American songs. They copied the rhythms by ear, practiced in secret, and played during Sunday gatherings. The officers allowed it, after all. It kept morale high. Soon the camp orchestra, Die Alabama Musiker, as they called themselves, began rehearsing swing numbers borrowed from American records. At first, it sounded clumsy, uneven, but as the weeks passed, the sound grew tighter, livelier, bolder. When they performed for both guards and prisoners one evening, the reaction stunned everyone. The Americans cheered. Even the stern camp commandant smiled. One guard shouted, "You play better than our guys do." That night, a strange transformation took place. For the Germans, it wasn't just about the music, it was about freedom. The freedom to improvise, to make mistakes, to smile without permission. It wasn't the kind of liberty written in political slogans. It was a living thing, pulsing through every brass note, every snare hit, every spontaneous laugh. And though none of them said it aloud, many felt the same quiet realization. This is what they mean by America. But that realization would soon bring inner conflict because every note of jazz clashed with the ideology they'd grown up believing. One humid evening in 1944, the German band finished its rehearsal early. The American guards lingered nearby, swapping cigarettes and teasing one another about who played worse. Then a young sergeant named Bill Hensley, a farm boy from Georgia, leaned against the fence and called out, "Hey, fellas, you ever try swinging that tune?" The Germans looked at each other, puzzled. "Swing?" one asked. Hensley grinned. "Yeah, loosen it up, make it dance." He grabbed a stick, tapped out a rhythm on a metal drum, and began humming the melody of Chattanooga Choo Choo. A few of the POWs laughed, then hesitantly joined in. Within minutes, they were clapping and stomping, trading rhythms across the wire. That night, something unthinkable happened. American guards and German prisoners played, together. It was informal, unapproved, but utterly human. The music spilled into the night air, drawing curious onlookers both sides, smiling, nodding, moving in time. For those few minutes, the barbed wire didn't matter. Afterward, one prisoner named Carl remembered it vividly. "We were supposed to hate them, but they laughed. We laughed, and it felt like the war had vanished." For men raised under rigid control, it was deeply disorienting. The enemy was supposed to be decadent, weak, chaotic, yet here they were, creative and kind. They joked freely, played passionately, respected individuality in a way few Germans had ever seen. A subtle shift began to take hold inside the camp. Conversations grew more open. A few guards shared magazines, Life, Saturday Evening Post, even comic strips. The Germans marveled at the informality of American life, workers speaking their minds, musicians improvising without fear, newspapers criticizing their own leaders. To men raised on censorship, the sight of a free press was as foreign as jazz itself. Letters sent home hinted at these discoveries, careful not to anger the censors, but quietly revealing new thoughts. "The Americans," one wrote, "are not as we were told. They are different, more confident, less afraid." But not everyone accepted this. A handful of hardline Nazis in the camp muttered angrily, accusing others of forgetting the fatherland. They formed cliques, held secret meetings, and sometimes destroyed American items, even music sheets. To them, jazz was poison. Still, the rhythm was unstoppable. The younger POWs, the students, the dreamers, they embraced it. Some began writing songs in a mixture of English and German. Others drew caricatures of swing dancers or painted murals of instruments on barrack walls. And every night, when the lights dimmed, someone somewhere in the camp would start to hum a tune. Even the guards noticed. One wrote in his report, "The Germans are behaving better than ever. Maybe it's the music." What had started as curiosity was turning into revelation, not just about sound, but about the spirit behind it. But that transformation didn't go unnoticed by those watching from above. By late 1944, the word of these subtle cultural shifts reached higher command. The US Army had long debated how to handle the thousands of German prisoners now scattered across the continent from Texas to Wisconsin. Should they simply be held until wars end, or could they be re-educated? The War Department launched what became known as the Special Projects Division, a quiet effort to expose German POWs to democratic ideals through books, discussions, and yes, culture. Officially, no prisoner could be forced to participate. But music, art, and film were powerful tools. At Camp Aliceville and others like it, camp libraries expanded. Newspapers in both German and English appeared, including one called Der Ruf, The Call. Its editors were carefully chosen anti-Nazi prisoners, men who had already begun questioning the finded ideology they'd once served. The paper printed essays about freedom, reconstruction, and even jazz, explaining how it had evolved from African American traditions into a symbol of creativity and resistance. To German eyes, it was baffling. This enemy nation that bombed their cities also gave space to music once banned at home and celebrated the men who created it. Re-education officers noticed that cultural exposure worked better than lectures. Music softened resistance where ideology failed. A tune could cross language barriers faster than pamphlets ever could. Not all embraced it. Hardliners sneered, calling those who joined English classes or music sessions traitors. Some camps saw tension flare, secret Nazi groups enforcing silence, spreading fear among fellow prisoners. At Aliceville, murals were torn down overnight, instruments broken in anger, but such acts only pushed others closer to the Americans. One sergeant named Otto later recalled, "They told us jazz was chaos, but I heard order, a different kind of order. It was freedom, but disciplined. I realized everything we'd been told about America was a lie." The US officers saw what was happening, but didn't interfere. They understood that genuine change could only come from within through experience, not instruction, so they let the bands play. By Christmas that year, the POW Orchestra performed for an audience of both Germans and Americans. They opened with a solemn German carol, then shifted seamlessly into Sentimental Journey. The applause was thunderous. That night, many guards swore they saw prisoners cry. In the following months, debates broke out quietly among the men. What was Germany fighting for now? Was everything they had believed still worth defending? The music had done what propaganda could not. It had opened the door to doubt. But even as this quiet transformation unfolded, reality pressed closer. Across the Atlantic, the Third Reich was crumbling. News trickled in of bombed cities, of families displaced, of entire divisions destroyed. And inside the camp, as victory for the Allies drew near, a new question loomed. When the war ended, what would they return to? As winter melted into spring 1945, the once confident men of the Africa Corps stood beneath blooming magnolias, wondering if their homeland still existed. Rumors spread faster than official reports. Berlin was being bombed, the Eastern Front collapsing, entire German cities' names whispered like prayers gone. For many prisoners, the sound of jazz, once thrilling, now carried melancholy. They'd learned the rhythms, even played them, but every note now reminded them of the world outside the fences, a world their nation was losing. Tension inside the camps grew thick. Some prisoners, hardened by ideology, became desperate to preserve a sense of control. They held secret courts, threatening or even attacking those who seemed Americanized. In some camps, acts of violence erupted, whispers of betrayal, of informants, of internal revenge. But others withdrew quietly, choosing to spend their final months learning, reflecting, or simply listening. The US guards noticed. "They've changed." One wrote in his diary, "The arrogance is gone. They talk more, they ask questions, they even ask about our elections." Yet, for all the camaraderie and musical connection, the prisoners were still captives. The fences remained. Floodlights cut through the night. The war's end did not bring instant freedom, it brought uncertainty. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, there were no cheers inside the camps, only silence. Some men stared at the ground for hours. Others played soft music, hymns, slow jazz, dirges that drifted into the night air. And then came the orders. Repatriation. They were going home, but home was not the same. The return process took months, even years. Many were first sent to Britain or France for labor duties before being allowed to set foot in Germany again. By the time they arrived, there, the nation was rubble. Cities flattened, streets unrecognizable, family homes reduced to ash. In that landscape of loss, the memories of Alabama, the music, the laughter, the cigarettes shared through a fence took on a strange weight. For some, it was guilt. For others, it was revelation. A few former POWs admitted, years later, that their time in America had changed them forever. One recalled, "When I first heard jazz, I thought it was noise. Later, I realized it was the sound of freedom." But not everyone could reconcile that new perspective with the ruins they found at home. Some kept quiet, burying those experiences deep inside. Others began to talk softly at first about what they'd seen, what they'd learned, and how it contradicted everything they had been told to believe. Still, amid the devastation, one question echoed in many hearts. If the enemy could be this human, this kind, this alive, what had they really been fighting for? In the years after 1945, the war's noise faded, but its echoes lived on inside those who'd been captives in America. For the former prisoners of Camp Aliceville, Camp Swift, and dozens of others, freedom did not mean returning unchanged. Many discovered they were strangers in their own homeland. Germany lay in ruins. Cities like Hamburg, Dresden, and Cologne were skeletons of stone and smoke. Food was scarce, jobs vanished, and politics fractured into occupation zones. But deeper still, something else had broken faith. Some men tried to pick up where they left off, rebuilding families, reopening businesses, sweeping away the memories of defeat. Yet in quiet corners of cafes or during reunions, talk always drifted back to America, to that strange, disarming world behind the barbed wire. For a few, the connection went further. Letters crossed the Atlantic, tentative handwritten messages between former guards and prisoners. A handful of those friendships blossomed into visits. A few POWs even returned permanently, sponsored by families who remembered them fondly. One such man, Friedrich Fritz Kohler, a one-time tank mechanic from Stuttgart, returned to the US in 1951. He married a nurse he had first met during a POW hospital stay in Mississippi. They settled in Illinois, where he opened a small machine shop and played trumpet on weekends. He told his son years later, "America didn't capture me with guns. It captured me with music." Others brought jazz back to Germany itself. In the late 1940s, when US occupation troops filled Berlin and Munich with records and radio broadcasts, it was often former POWs who understood the rhythms first. They translated, taught, and performed, helping spread swing and bebop through post-war Germany's shattered streets. The once banned sound became the heartbeat of a new generation, one that sought distance from dictatorship and found meaning in improvisation. Even decades later, veterans remembered the nights of Alabama and Texas. One wrote, "I came to America. As a soldier, I left as a listener." Some carried their instruments home, tucked inside battered duffel bags. Others held onto photographs of smiling guards or yellowed newspaper clippings from their roof. Most carried only memory, the memory of a saxophone solo that pierced the silence of captivity. The irony wasn't lost on them. They had been sent across an ocean as prisoners, yet returned with a kind of liberation the Reich could never give. And though time dimmed faces and blurred names, the music never faded. In smoky post-war bars, in student cafes, in the hum of American Forces radio, that same rhythm lived on. Because for those men, jazz was no longer just music. It was proof that even behind fences, humanity could survive, and that, sometimes, the truest form of freedom is heard long before it's seen. The story of the German POWs who heard jazz in America is not about winners or losers. It's about revelation, how culture can slip through the cracks of war and reach the human soul. Inside those camps, ideology met rhythm, and rhythm won. The men who once fought beneath a banner of obedience found themselves swaying to a music born of freedom, improvisation, and defiance. They learned that America was not chaos, but confidence, not decadence, but creativity. And though the world they returned to was shattered, That sound bright, untamed, eternal remained with them. A saxophone in the Alabama night had done what bullets never could. It changed hearts,